So we are in Chanukah, Baruch Hashem. In Chanukah, traditionally, Chazal have focused on the Parshiot. They have demanded that the Parshas of Mechiras Yosef and the reconciliation of specifically of Vayigash must be incorporated at this time. Miketz, Vayigash, those are the Parshas of Chanukah. Why? Now I'm going to go in a longer circle to get to the answer to that question. Hold me to it, though. So the real title of today's shiur is 6 Chanukah Presents from the United Nations. Okay? 6 Chanukah presents from the United Nations. I'm going to say what they are. You ready? UN condemns Israel through 6 resolutions in one day. Now, note, let's go through what they are, just so because it's fascinating. And okay, on Friday, which was Erev, Shabbos goes right into Chanukah, so it was the last working day that they had before Chanukah. Let's put it that way. Monday was Chanukah, so the last possible moment. And also, make a note. Which day of the week was it? The 6th day. 6 resolutions on the 6th day. And I'll tell you how it's no accident. The first one had to do with the Golan, known as the Syrian Golan. So the idea is to remove any connection between Am Yisrael, the Jewish state, and Golan. That passed 104, 12 against, 62 exemptions, which is really pretty not bad. Okay, the United Kingdom did vote against it, and including such prominent world powers as Kiribati, Marshall Islands, Micronesia, and a few other world powers, but including the United States, Israel, Canada, Australia. Okay, that's number 1. So to separate Israel from Syria and the Golan Heights. Second, which was called Yerushalayim. It was adopted 148, 411 against, 14 abstentions. And what was this? That the Israeli administration of Jerusalem hinders freedom of religion, and that and that it's bad. In other words, Jewish rule on Jerusalem is unjust because it is the province of other religions, and therefore Israel should not be the sole power. Third, the division of Palestinian rights of the Secretariat, which appropriates funds for anti-Israel purposes. That already had only 96 votes, 13 against, 64 abstentions. And what is this DPR, Division of Palestinian Rights? Serves the Bias Special Committee and is dedicated to spreading anti-Israel propaganda over the whole world. So this is what? Vayareu osam, to speak slander about the Jewish people. That's the third. Fourth is a special information program on the question of Palestine. What is that? A balanced approach of choosing Palestinian over Israeli narrative, ignoring terrorism against Israeli men, women, and children, and other daily realities of Israeli life. So it is accusing, this one is accusatory of the fact that Jews are committing crimes against women and children, etc. The fifth, they want a peaceful settlement of the question of Palestine. What does that mean? Give them the rest of Israel. As this guest speaker, who was later fired from CNN, said, that means give Palestine from the Jordan River to the sea. That's what that means. So far we had take away the Golan Heights, take away Yerushalayim, and we progress on to defame the Jewish people, and therefore take away the rest of Eretz Yisrael. And the final resolution is the unalienable rights of the Palestinian people, which I don't even have what that is exactly, but I think that has to do with flooding Israel with millions and millions of refugees to make any trace of Israel irrelevant. So they did a great job. Thank you for the 6 Chanukah presents. I think it's not a mistake that it happened on Erev Chanukah, and I'll tell you why. The notion of Jewish sovereignty over Eretz Yisrael and over Yerushalayim in particular is something that the Umos HaOlam, until the days of Mashiach, can and will never agree to. Hashem has created a circumstance where we have some sort of sovereignty here, at least a Jewish life here in Eretz Yisrael, to whatever extent we have some sovereignty. However, that's not an easy thing for the Umos HaOlam to swallow. And eventually, even after Mashiach comes, listen carefully, there will be a war called Gog Magog, because ultimately they will not be able to accept and digest these 6 points. That one, the Jewish people are entitled to their land, of the land of the 10 tribes, which is Syria and so on. 2, that they should not have any control of Yerushalayim. 3, that they are not a righteous nation or Lagoyim, but just the opposite. 4, that the rest of Eretz Yisrael is not their province. And 5, that they should not have any Jews even living in Eretz Yisrael. So that's pretty complete and thorough. And I want to show you something remarkable about the sale of Yosef. I'll explain to you the point. And this is the point Bnei Yissaschar makes. As we mentioned, Bnei Yissaschar is the most famous sefer regarding Pesach. He considered Pesach his specialty, and it is often quoted in all the Sfarim. And he says as follows. There is a connection between the struggle between Yaakov and Esav and Chanukah. How is that? Because what did Yaakov do? What was he going back for when he was struggling for Chanukah? The little pachim katanim. So Chazal connected. What's the connection? What does it have to do with it? First of all, Esav has nothing to do with the Greeks. In fact, the Romans followed the Greeks, were a lot worse than the Greeks. The Greeks came with elephants. The Romans came with technology and battering rams, much, much worse of a problem. An elephant you could shoot. You don't shoot a battering ram. It doesn't help, okay? The Romans were far more formidable, war-like machine than anything the Greeks could ever present. So whatever the Maccabees could do against the Greeks, they couldn't touch the Romans. And the fact that they were successful on Bar Kokhba to defeat the Romans is a testimony to in the incredible military power that the Jewish people, with the help of Hashem, demonstrated. Impossible. So what does Esav have to do with anything? And Esav does what? Esav grabs Yaakov where? Bekaf Yerecho. Okay? Bekaf Yerech. The Malach of Esav damages Yaakov, right? That he can't walk properly. And we said that demonstrates, that is the idea of standing on your own 2 feet monetarily. You can't stand on your own 2 feet because he created a rupture between Yaakov and Parnasa. And that is a huge problem because you need a lot of money to support institutions of Torah and create Jewish life. Tremendous amount of money. And if you can't support the yeshivas and you can't support the shuls, there is no Jewish life. So Esav was able to damage Klal Yisrael. That also Gid Anosha means the children. He damaged us in that there would be many, many Jewish children that would be deprived of Torah education and be led off the derech and to be completely assimilated over the centuries. That was the damage of Chanukah. Which is one of the reasons why Chanukah is observed by any Jew, and plenty of non-Jews also, by the way. Yeah, even in the White House. Because, as we mentioned last week, Chanukah represents that last little spark of Kedusha in the neshama of a Jew. So they could be, who knows what, intermarried, eating tray, it doesn't make a difference. Something about the most widely observed mitzvah in the world is Neiros Chanukah. Far more than Yom Kippur, far more than Pesach, Neiros Chanukah. And that's not an accident. But the idea of the Neiros Chanukah, the Pachshem and the Yaakov went back for, was because he was about to suffer a tremendous blow. Now that part of the body that was damaged correlates to the midah of Hod, which is Aaron HaKohen. Aaron HaKohen. Now, if you don't have Hod, you don't have the kahuna, then you can't move on to Yesod, which is the tzaddik, which is represented by Yosef. And if you've broken the connection at Hod and Yesod, what don't you ever get to? Malchus. Follow me? If we can just knock out either Hod or Yesod, then Malchus Yisrael will never be achieved. So you could imagine it in two swipes. One is that that Esav attacked the midah of Hod. And I'll explain this on a deeper level, because anybody who contested the Kahuna Gedola, Aaron HaKohen represents Hod. What does Hod mean? But specifically, the unity of the Jewish people. What did Aaron run around doing? Being husband and wife, between friends and family. And who was mourned more? Aaron or Moshe?
Aaron.
Why?
Because of that leader that he loved. He would take it upon himself to be insulted, but to help people get...
Correct. And therefore, Chanukah story centers around which individual? The Kohen Gadol. Now, I'm going a little deeper than this. You ready? The Gemara tells us in Yuma about the beginning of the Greek era, the beginning of the tsaros of the Greeks. Who was the first individual that introduced Greek thought, Aristotelian thought, conquered the world, and instituted Greek philosophy, Alexander Macedonia. How many years ago was that exactly? Historically, that was 300 years before the Common Era. It was just about the time of the beginning of Bayit Sheni. Okay? With me? Who was in charge of the Jewish people at that time? The transition between the Galus of Bavel and Persia, and going back to Eretz Yisrael. Which biblical figures do we have? Ezra, Nehemiah, who else? Mordechai, Esther, Malachi. Okay. And who were they were part of a larger group of 120, which were known as Anshe Knesset HaGedola. Who was the final member of the Anshe Knesset HaGedola? The last notable member of the Anshe Knesset HaGedola was Shimon HaTzadik, who was, in the beginning of the second Beis Hamikdash period, he was the Kohen Gadol. At the same time as who? As Alexander the Great. Exactly at the same time. Okay, so the story in Yoma, as you probably are familiar with, but it's important to put it in the context of Chanukah, was that, and this is the story, the Gemara says that there was a holiday that they declared called the Day of Har Grizim. Now, who lives on Har Grizim? Who quasi-Jews? Shomronim, who the Christians made great. They called them the what? The Good Samaritans. Why the Good Samaritans? Because that means the bad Jews. The Samaritans were mortal enemies of the Jewish people. Why? Because they competed. They wanted to present themselves as the legitimate Jews, that the real owners, shall we say, of Eretz Yisrael. And where did they plant themselves? By Har Grizim and Har Eval. That's where their temple is, and they have some sort of Torah, and they have some sort of thing. They broke off from Jewish tradition many, 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 many years before, but they saw in the rise of Alexander the Great an opportunity to destroy the yet young second Beis Hamikdash. It was still young, it still wasn't fully established, it was just growing, they were still struggling to establish themselves among their many, many enemies in Eretz Yisrael, and at the head were the Shomronim, the Samaritans. And they approached Alexander the Great on his way in from, what city is named after Alexander the Great? Alexandria. So he came from Macedonia, which is like in Turkey, comes down through the Dardanelles, whatever they're called over there, and through the Greek islands, sails the Mediterranean down to Egypt, conquers Egypt, and then he starts to move up the coast of Eretz Yisrael. He had two objectives. He wanted to conquer Gaza and Halavai, and also all the way up the coast to Sidon, to Lebanon. On the way, he's intercepted by this Shomronim, who run to him and say, we pledge our loyalty to you. Because whenever a country surrendered to Alexander the Great, and they all did, he just wanted one thing: adopt my philosophy and my way of governance, and then you can keep your temples and do what you want. In other words, it's a hybrid. That's known as Hellenism. That's what Hellenism is. Hellenism was a hybrid between the local culture and the Hellenic culture, the Greek culture, which included, and primarily, the philosophy of Aristotle. You have to know that he was a Talmud Muvak, Lahavdil. He was Aristotle. He came with a philosophy, not just with a military. The Romans were all about money, might, and power. In fact, I was reading in the history, Sfarim, about Antiochus Epiphanes, the villain of the Chanukah story, who was educated in Rome. So he had the worst of both worlds. He had the Roman lust for grandeur, money, and power, and wars, and he had the Greek philosophy. He had it all. That's why some called him Epiphanes, meaning the one with the grand plans, or Epimanus, which means the madman, okay, as he was called, by his own people, and certainly by the Jews. So Alexander did not want to destroy the temple, but the Shomronim convinced him that the Jews are antithetical to his philosophy, would never accept Aristotle's ideas, because, and if you go and research this a little bit, if I ask you the question, did Aristotle believe in God? Who can answer that question? Did he believe in God?
You believe that there was a first mate, like a first...
That's right, a prime mover, a first cause of some kind. But he didn't know how to define it, and he didn't really care. Because once you get past the first cause, right, everything else he can explain logically. And I'm not recording myself, which is terrible. Okay, but you'll send me a recording, yes? So that's what you had to do. So come to Shomronim and say, this is not going to go over with the Jews. The Jews have a completely different religion. They believe in this one God. They're not going to accept the Greek pantheon, which even Aristotle said, why not? If Aristotle had a religion, it was the Greek gods, even if he didn't really believe in it. But here's what's interesting. Our Aristotelian thought, which the Rambam was not against in many ways, and he was very expert in, spoke about ideals. That human beings need to work on perfecting themselves, and in order to perfect yourself, you need a model to follow, right? Virtues, goodness, kindness. And you just can't go through your life and eat and drink and sleep. You have to strive to reach some sort of ethical perfection, right? So they thought that the gods, on some level, represented these models to strive after. Yeah. As crazy as they were, right. So he wasn't against it. He just like, it fits, it kind of fits, you know. So it fits. And the idea of, what was their mantra? A beautiful mind, or a healthy mind in a healthy body, which means that they absolutely wanted to celebrate the physicality of man. The first things that the Hellenists end up doing, and I'm jumping ahead from Alexander the Great, is building what in Yerushalayim? A gymnasium. What happened at the gymnasium? Number one, they sacrificed to all the Greek gods. Then they played the sports. And how did they play it? They played it without clothing. And it was encouraging licentiousness and lewdness. And that's what they brought into the heart of Yerushalayim, something that no one could even dream to do before Alexander came on the scene. So Shimon HaTzadik hears that the Shomronim have convinced Alexander to let them take over the temple in Jerusalem and destroy it and make Har Gerizim the center of Jewish life under the Alexandrian rule. Not a good thing. So comes Shimon HaTzadik, the Kohen Gadol, wearing the garments of the Kohen Gadol. Are you allowed to wear them outside the Beis HaMikdash? Absolutely not. Why did he wear them? Pikuach Nefesh. He has to impress Alexander. And for another reason too. As we know, as Alexander approaches in the company of the Shomronim, they take a detour from Gaza towards Jerusalem because they had business to do there, right? out goes, according to the Gemara, Shimon HaTzadik took some of the elders of Yerushalayim, and they met in a place called Sebastia. I'm not exactly sure where that is, but it's somewhere between Yerushalayim and Gaza, outskirts of Yerushalayim. He gets off his horse and he bows down to Shimon HaTzadik, and the Shomonim are devastated because their plans just went out by the books. And they ask him, why did you bow down to this Jew? You're a general who's on your way to conquering the world. And he said, every time before I go out to war and I am victorious, I have a vision of this man come to me in my dreams. So much for the Shomonim, and it was declared a day of miracles, and the Jews end up destroying the Samaritan temple on Har Gerizim, and they called it Happy Har Gerizim Day. That's the Gemara. But Alexander didn't stop there. What did he ask Shimon HaTzadik to do? Go ahead.
The name of the kids, and the date was a little bit changed from Alexander's birth, whatever it was, but they changed it.
They should honor him. Okay. Okay, so, but what was it? That was the compromise, right? So you're saying, what did Alexander ask the Jews to do? First thing he asked was?
The tax, they were going to collect the tax Jews, which turned out to be very bad.
That's right. But before that, he requested to put an idol of his image into the Beit HaMikdash. Something that would never be acceptable, not to Shimon HaTzadik and not to anybody else. I mean, that was the one thing that the Jews could not absolutely tolerate, was idolatry in the temple itself. That was unheard of. That was going back to first Beis HaMikdash problems, and this was a more devout and smaller but tightly knit unit, very devoted to Hashem, at least to that point. So they offered him instead to name every child of the Kohanim in that year Alexander. My wife, Sosain Gesund, has a grandfather, Alav Shalom, whose name was Alexander. And Alexander Sender, I have in my family more than one member. Hence, Alexander and the name Sender, Alexander Sender, became Jewish names from 300 before the Common Era. But that was the beginning of the problems. If you think about it symbolically, the fact that he was able to change the names of the Kohanim already was a Hellenization of sorts. And eventually, two Hellenistic Kohen Gadol's arise and take advantage of an evil king, egoistic and dangerous madman named Antiochus IV. How many years later is that? That's exactly 125 years later. It took 125 years under Greek rule for Hellenism to seep into Jewish society and begin to transform it to such an extent that they went right for the jugular. The symbol of Jewish Kedusha and power, and Malchus really, was the Kahuna Gedola. And what happened historically? So there was a righteous Kohen Gadol, he was considered positive, named Chonyo. Chonyo was deposed by a treacherous person known as, was challenged by a person named Shimon, who was already a Hellenist. Shimon the Hellenist just wanted a job. You know, the economic center of Klal Yisrael was the Har Habayis, was Yerushalayim, because everybody brought their Meiser Sheni, and they brought all their, that was the market, that was the shuk, of everything. People came from far and wide. People sent money from all over the world. Gold and silver appeared from all over the world. And the second Beis HaMikdash already had, over those 125 years, gotten wealthy. Under the Greeks, not under the Persians, because the Persians took every last penny. Iranians are very, very tough to deal with. You're not going to make money doing business with an Iranian. You're just not going to make any money with Persians. Try to buy from them diamonds. You will end up losing money. There's no way to do it. They're too clever. They're too strong. But the Greeks were far more lavish and generous, especially since Rome was already on the scene, and that was the style, to be more lavish, more extravagant. So business starts to come to Eretz Yisrael, and Jews are prospering, and the Beis Hamikdash, of course, is adorned with gold and silver and everything good, and a vast treasury accumulates over 125 years until Chonyo, the Kohen Gadol, is confronted by one of the Midyavnim and says, it's time for you to start sharing some of this wealth. The wealth should not be centered in the hands of the Kohen Gadol who is devout to Torah mitzvos. Us secular Jews, we want a piece of the action. I don't want to go into that too much in terms of Yerushalayim and Harabais. But I want a job. What job do you want? I want to oversee the markets. That's a very, very important economic position. The Jews in Yerushalayim hear that this Shimon wants to take over, and they rebel against him. I think they're going to kill him. I'm trying to remember. Don't quote me on that. But they certainly get rid of him. The next person up, however, decided, but it was a turning point, because the turning point was, now the Hellenists can start to creep into control. And the one big prize was to be the Kohen Gadol. Because if you're the Kohen Gadol, you are ruling Jerusalem and the temple. So the only way to get it was by bribing the new king, who was all about money and power. So there was a bribe offered by Menelaus, who is the villain of the Chanukah story, and his brother Lysimachus. I used to hear these names when my father Zankazot would read me the Chanukah story from the book of Maccabees, and when I was a little boy. And here it is. They bribed Antiochus vast amounts of money to make them the Kohen Gadol. This first time that the Kohen Gadol was up for sale was around 175 before the Common Era. At that time, of course, Antiochus grants them that. In the meantime, what are they going to pay with? So they pay with the taxes. In other words, the taxes that are supposed to go to the Greek government end up in the hands of the cronies of of Antiochus. And then when it came time to pay the taxes, what did they do? They came to Menelaus and said, you owe us the taxes. The army needs to get paid. And he said, I don't got any more money. So what does he do instead? He's summoned to Antioch, to the capital, to be reprimanded for not fessing up the money that was supposed, and he brings with him a bribe. And the bribe, for the first time ever, is the gold and silver kelim of the Beit HaMikdash. That was the breach. That they put Pashtu Yodam B'Mamonam. And that started that episode of which would end up in Antiochus plundering every last vessel of gold and silver, according to our sources. He took the menorah, he took the shulchan, he took anything, the mizbeach. He took even stripped the doors of their gold plating. Nothing was left. That was what was going on. So if that is the symbol of Yaakov and Esav's struggle. The fact that he grabbed Kaf Yeres Yaakov, which represents the economic viability of a Malchus, of a kingdom, and of a Beis HaMikdash, was damaged by the Malach of Esav. Damaged. And the Kahuna Gedola was itself the struggle. And that's why Matisyahu, Kohen Gadol, is the one who stands up. So it's very interesting that it's all the story of Hod. Now let's extrapolate this. Hold on tight. You ready? In time, which period of history is Keneged Hod and Aaron HaKohen? It's the 5th millennium. The 5th millennium is from the year 240 approximately to the year 1240. It is 1,000 years long. Now remember, although the Chanukah story took place about 100 years before the Common Era, that's not a long time before the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, right? It was only another 200 years that the Beis HaMikdash lasted, and of course, it was already under the thumb, other than it was started to be, except for the brief period of the Hashmonayim, the Romans come in, and basically, even before the Common Era, the Romans were really in charge. The Hashmonaim had a brief success, went off the derech, invited Rome in, and that was the really beginning of the end. Herod and so on and so forth. So that was all before the Common Era. So we had a very, very slight window. As far as we're concerned, the Chanukah story really was already the beginning of the end. It was the last hurrah. It actually was like Chanukah itself. It was a spark of light of what the future and what the potential of Am Yisrael really is. It was a flash of what's going to come. But then that light went out for 1,000 years. And Chazal, the people who commented from the Zohar, said that that 1,000-year exile, which was decreed upon us, of course, partially due to what? The sale of Yosef. And after all, who really caused the problems with the Kahuna Gedola? Think, who destroyed the Beis HaMikdash really? Like we say, the second Beis HaMikdash was destroyed because of Sinas Chinam. When Shimon and Menelaus and Lysimachus will not honor the Kohen Gedula to let it follow Torah mitzvos, but fight for the domination of it, that's when we crack, and that's when the Umos HaOlam are able to get us. As long as Klal Yisrael stands strong, Syria, the 10 tribes, and Yerushalayim, and the rest of Eretz Yisrael can hold it together. But if we don't stand strong together, that's why, says the Bnei Yissaschar, that dreidels should be made out of wood. I don't know what kind of dreidel you have. We had a carton filled with candies. We couldn't spin it, though. It was about this big. I give it to the kids. But you have to have a wooden dreidel. Why wooden dreidel? Because the Navi says that the eights of Yehuda and the eights of Yosef need to come together. When do Yehuda and Yosef come together? During these parshios. Vayigash Alav Yehuda. Therefore, Chanukah is the period where we read about the reconciliation between Yosef and his brothers. Specifically, Yosef and Yehuda, and who's the connecting point over which they reconnect. Who is the one? Yosef. And who's the one, and who are the two that caused the rupture? Really, maybe three, or responsible to whatever extent, Reuven, Shimon, and Levi. As we've discussed previously, that was because of the contest. And it was because of the damage that Lavan did by mixing up Leah and Rachel and bringing forth Reuven, Shimon, Levi, and Yehuda, and then only Yosef, that we got into all these problems to begin with. So who caused the damage and the rupture? Outside forces. Lavan, Esav, are all part of this dynamic. So what does the sale of Yosef really mean? It's taking the structure of Klal Yisrael and cutting away Hod and Yesod. And if you cut away Hod and Yesod, you will have destroyed Malchus. There's no way for it to reach the Rabbi. Those are the last two rungs of the ladder. And they are represented by the Greek Galut and the Roman Galut, okay, which forged together. Hod and Yesod. So what is the main enemy of the Midah of Yesod is Esav. That's why he attacks Yaakov in his Gid HaNasha, which is also the reproductive organs.